Chapter 14. The Final Scene. The air on set had a kind of electric quality to it, a mixture of excitement and exhaustion that buzzed through the crew as they prepared for the final scene. Cameras were being adjusted, lights positioned just so, and the director paced back and forth, glancing occasionally at his watch. Everyone was ready to end the long, grueling journey that had been this film. Everyone except Emily. She sat off to the side, her body low to the ground, ears twitching at the flurry of activity around her. Her chest rose and fell with slow, deep breaths, but her mind was anything but calm. The final scene was simple, just a quiet moment of connection between her canine character and the little girl she had bonded with over the course of the story. No dramatic action, no complex choreography. It was meant to be a moment of peace, of resolution. But Emily felt anything but peaceful. The past few weeks had been a blur. Her thoughts, once sharp and human, had become clouded by the instincts of her new body. Her mind had been changing, adapting, becoming more and more like the animal she now resembled. She had fallen into a rhythm. Eat, sleep, film, repeat, moving through the days with a kind of automatic precision. The complexity of her human life had been replaced by the simplicity of her canine existence, and, in some strange way, it had brought her a sense of calm, and that calm terrified her. She had lived as a dog for so long now that the idea of returning to her old life felt foreign, almost alien. Could she even go back? Would she want to? The questions haunted her, gnawing at the edges of her mind, but she had pushed them aside, focused instead on finishing the film. She had told herself that once filming was over, she would figure it out. Now, the moment was here. The end of the first journey. The end of her life as a dog. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Paul approached her, his face shadowed with concern. He crouched down beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You ready for the final scene?" His voice was soft, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it. He knew, just as she did, that this scene wasn't just the end of the film. It was the beginning of the next chapter in her life. Emily looked up at him, her amber eyes locking with his. She wanted to answer, to tell him that she was ready, that she could handle this, but the words wouldn't come. Her mouth moved slightly, her tongue flicking against her teeth, but the sounds that emerged were low, soft whines. Paul's hand stroked through her fur, his touch familiar and comforting. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said quietly. "We can take a break." Emily shook her head, or at least, she tried to. The motion felt awkward, unnatural, her body no longer responding the way it should. She didn't need a break. She needed to finish this. She needed to get through the scene, to see it through to the end. Because once the cameras stopped rolling, she would have to make a choice. And the weight of that choice felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. The director called for quiet on set, and the crew fell into a hushed silence. Emily's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, her body instinctively responding to the commands, to the routine she had become so accustomed to. She rose to her feet, her paws pressing into the cool floor, and padded over to her mark. The little girl was already there, sitting cross-legged on the ground, her wide eyes filled with affection and trust. She smiled at Emily as she approached, her small hands outstretched, ready to embrace the loyal dog who had been her companion throughout the story. It was a simple scene, a wordless exchange of love and connection between human and animal. But for Emily, it was more than that. It was a goodbye. She moved into position, her body lowering itself to the ground in front of the girl, her head resting gently on the child's lap. The little girl's hands stroked through her fur, the touch soft and warm. And for a moment, Emily felt a pang of something deep inside her, something human. This is the last time. The thought came unbidden, sharp and painful. This would be the last time she would feel this way, the last moment she would experience life as this creature. Once the scene was over, it would all change, or at least it was supposed to. Action! The director's voice rang out, and the scene began. The cameras rolled, capturing the quiet, intimate moment between the two characters. The little girl whispered soft words of comfort, her hands never leaving Emily's fur. Emily's body relaxed into the touch, her mind quieting for a moment, the world around her fading into the background. But even as she lay there, a part of her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't ignore. This was the end of her time as a dog, the end of the life she had known for so many months. And yet, the idea of returning to her human body, of walking on two legs again, of speaking in words instead of instincts, it felt wrong. What if I don't want to go back? The thought was terrifying, but it was true. The simplicity of her canine existence had brought her a kind of peace she had never expected. There was no overthinking, no second guessing, no complicated emotions to navigate. Life as a dog was straightforward, instinctual. She knew what she needed, and she acted on it. There was a freedom in that, a freedom she wasn't sure she could give up. "Cut!" the director called, and the scene was over. The crew erupted into applause, cheers filling the air as they celebrated the end of the long and arduous shoot. The little girl stood up, beaming, and gave Emily one last pat on the head before running off to join her parents. The crew began to dismantle the set, their voices loud and excited, congratulating each other on a job well done. But Emily just stood there, frozen in place, her body tense and unmoving. The world around her seemed distant, the sounds muffled, as if she were underwater. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to face the truth. Paul found her again, his face full of concern as he knelt beside her. "You did great," he said softly, his hand once again resting on her back. "It's over. You can rest now." But Emily didn't feel like resting. She couldn't. The weight of the decision that lay ahead of her pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had lived as a dog for so long that the idea of returning to her human life felt impossible. "I don't know if I can do this," she finally whispered, her voice rough and broken. Paul's hand stilled on her back, his eyes widening slightly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know if I can go back," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I want to." The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken fear and uncertainty. Paul opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed to die on his lips. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to help her through this, because the truth was, no one could. Later that evening, Emily sat in Dr. Shaw's office, her body curled up on the floor as she stared at the sterile white walls. The room was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. Doctor! Shaw sat across from her, his face calm and unreadable as he waited for her to speak. They're ready, he said finally, breaking the silence. Doctor! Marks and her team have everything prepared for the reversal. We can begin as soon as you're ready. Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. The words felt too heavy, too final. She had known this moment was coming, had known that, once the film was finished, she would have to make a decision. But now that it was here, She wasn't sure she could do it. I know this has been difficult. Doctor, Shaw continued, his voice gentle. The transformation was more thorough than any of us expected. But the reversal process is sound. We've preserved your original bones, your organs. We can restore you to your human form. But what if I don't want to be human anymore? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Doctor! Shaw's eyes softened, his expression full of understanding. Emily, you are human. No matter what your body looks like, no matter what instincts you've developed, your mind is still your own. You're still you. I don't feel like me anymore, she confessed, her voice breaking. I've lived like this for so long. I don't even remember what it feels like to be human. I don't remember how to walk on two legs, how to speak like I used to. I don't know if I can go back to that. Doctor! Shaw leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. You can. It will take time, but you can. Your body has adapted to this form, but it will adapt again. You just have to trust the process. Emily shook her head, her body trembling with fear. I don't know if I want to. Life as a dog, it's simpler. It's easier. I don't have to think so much. I don't have to worry. I just live. Doctor! Shaw was silent for a moment, his eyes studying her closely. I understand, he said finally, but simplicity isn't the same as happiness. Emily, you're not meant to live like this. You're not meant to be stuck in this form forever. But what if I don't feel human anymore? She asked, her voice cracking. What if I'm more dog than person now? Doctor! Shaw's gaze softened even more, his expression filled with compassion. You've been through something extraordinary, something no one else has ever experienced. It's natural to feel disconnected, to feel like you've lost a part of yourself. But your humanity is still there. Emily, it's not gone. It's just buried, and we can help you find it again. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, Emily didn't move. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, crushing her. She had lived as a dog for so long that the idea of returning to her old life felt impossible. But at the same time, the thought of staying like this, of living the rest of her life as an animal, was equally terrifying. She didn't know what to do. That night, Emily stood in front of the small mirror in her trailer, staring at her reflection. Her canine face stared back at her, the sharp, intelligent eyes of a dog gazing into her own. For so long, this had been her reality. This face, this body, had become her identity. But now, as she looked at herself, she felt a pang of something deep inside her, something human. Who am I? The question echoed in her mind, and for the first time, she didn't know the answer. The next morning, Emily made her decision. She stood in the sterile, white operating room, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Doctor! Marks and her team were ready, the machines humming softly in the background as they prepared for the procedure. Doctor! Shaw stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her back, offering her silent support. Are you sure about this? Doctor! Marks asked, her voice calm but serious. Emily hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She had lived as a dog for so long that the idea of returning to her human body felt alien, almost impossible. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't stay like this forever. She couldn't live the rest of her life trapped in this form, no matter how simple or peaceful it might seem. I'm sure, she said finally, her voice steady. Dad? Doctor! Marks nodded, her expression unreadable as she turned to her team. Let's begin. The procedure took hours. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, the world around her fading in and out of focus. She could feel the tug of the machines, the sharp prick of needles, the strange sensation of her body being changed, piece by piece. The preserved bones and organs that had once been hers were reimplanted, the genetic modifications slowly reversed. It was a painstaking process, one that required precision and care. But the team worked tirelessly, their hands steady as they worked to restore her to her original form. When Emily finally woke, the world felt different. She lay in a hospital bed, her body aching, her mind foggy. The first thing she noticed was the weight of her limbs, the way they felt unfamiliar and heavy. She blinked, her eyes slowly adjusting to the light, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if the procedure had worked. Then she moved. Her hand lifted from the bed, the fingers trembling slightly as she raised them to her face. Her skin was soft, smooth, human. She stared at her fingers for a long moment, the sensation of touch, foreign but familiar at the same time. It had worked. Dad? Doctor! Shaw was there when she finally sat up, his face breaking into a relieved smile as he saw her awake. How do you feel? He asked gently, his voice soft. Emily didn't answer right away. She was too overwhelmed, too disoriented. She could feel the weight of her human body, the way it felt foreign after so many months in her canine form. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief. I feel, she began, her voice hoarse. I feel different. Dad? Doctor! Shaw nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. It will take time to adjust. You've been through something extraordinary. Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers curling and uncurling slowly. I don't know if I remember how to be human. You will, Dr. Shaw said softly. It's still there. Emily, your humanity. It's just going to take time to find it again. As the days passed, Emily slowly began to adjust to her new reality. The physical recovery was difficult. Her body felt weak, her muscles atrophied from months of disuse. Walking on two legs felt foreign and unstable, and she had to relearn the simplest of movements. But the hardest part wasn't the physical recovery. It was reclaiming her mind. The primal instincts that had dominated her life for so long were still there, lurking in the background, whispering to her in moments of weakness. She still found herself reacting to sounds and smells in ways that weren't quite human. Her dreams were still filled with images of running, hunting, and mating. And sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she still expected to see the face of a dog staring back at her. But she was learning, slowly, day by day. She was learning to be human again. One evening, as she stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, Emily stared at her reflection. The face that stared back at her was her own, truly her own. The sharp, intelligent eyes of a human. The soft, pale skin that had once felt so foreign to her. But even as she looked at herself, she knew that things would never be the same. She had lived as a dog for too long. She had experienced life in a way that no one else ever had, and that experience had changed her. It had left a mark on her, a mark that would never fully fade. As she gazed into the mirror, her human eyes staring back at her, Emily knew one thing for certain. No matter what her body looked like, No matter how much time passed, she would never truly be able to reclaim the person she had once been.